Good morning again, for those who were here 1 hour ago. I have the great pleasure to welcome you to the press conference here in Geneva by the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Phillippe Lazzarini. Before I start, let me just introduce to you also our colleague Juliette Thomas, who is the new Director of Communication of UNRWA, so that if you need any information, any further questions on the appeal that is going to be launched today, Juliette will be the person to address, and I'm asking by this information to my colleagues in the front desk to send all the journalists the contacts with Juliette. So without further ado, I have the great pleasure to give the floor now to Commissioner General Lazzarini. And just to remind you that you have received the press release on the appeal this morning. And of course, the embargo is now lifted at 12 o'clock. And so we will start with introductory remark by Commissioner General, and then we will open the floor to questions.
Thank you.
Phillippe.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you this morning for this press briefing. As indicated, I had a briefing with the Member States this morning to launch the 2023 appeal of the organization, but also to share some broad line of the new strategic framework of the agency for the next coming 6 years. I started my briefing this morning by reminding about the gravity and the severity of the situation in the region. I told the Member State I just came back from a trip in Syria where I visited Ain el-Tal, which is a camp near Aleppo, and basically told them how shocked I was, bringing me back to the images we have seen in Yarmouk. The level of destruction in this camp was quite unbelievable. And last week, it's winter, it's very cold here in Geneva, but I can tell you that this destruction and people emerging in the rubble of Ain el-Tal in winter time, at a time there is absolutely no electricity, no fuel, no diesel. It is extraordinarily hard for them. I also describe how desperate and distressful the situation is in Lebanon after the financial and economic collapse in the country. And basically, despite the fact, if I talk about Syria and Lebanon, but Syria, despite the fact that there have been 12 years of conflict, I'm always struck that during each of my visits, the day-to-day life of the people is becoming more and more difficult. I thought that they have reached rock bottom some time ago, but I discover each time that this misery people are confronted with is getting worse and worse. My plea this morning to the Member State was to make sure that UNRWA continue to be a predictable agency. As you know, the primary mandate this agency has is to provide public-like services to one of the most underprivileged populations in the region, being the Palestine refugees. We act in reality as a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of Primary Health, a Ministry of Municipalities, or a Ministry of Social Services for this extraordinary vulnerable group, being the Palestinian refugees. But in addition to this, we are also providing emergency humanitarian assistance. And hence, my appeal this morning for a total of $1.6 billion, which on one hand will cover our program budget, the government-like services for $848 million, and we were also calling for the humanitarian assistance for the occupied Palestinian territories for $445 million as well as for the Syrian crisis for a total of $437 million, which brings the total to about $1.6 billion. I also told the donor this morning that we should not take the ability of the agency to muddle through financial crisis as a given. It is true that in 2022, we succeeded to keep all our services running for the Palestinian refugees. But it came at a cost, at a very high cost. For the fourth consecutive year, we are ending with a large deficit of above $70 million, which means that the first $70 million we will be receiving from the international community will have to be used to pay the arrear of the agency. So muddling through is not an option anymore because it's not a sustainable way to keep our operation. We cannot continue to be an unpredictable partner, unsettling communities, unsettling host countries, unsettling 30,000 staff just because we do not have anymore the reliability and the predictability in terms of funding. I keep saying, and you heard me many times, saying that on one hand, we are asked to deliver public-like services to one of the most underprivileged communities in the region. We obviously, as a UN agency, abide to UN value, but in reality, we are funded like an NGO, meaning that we depend on voluntary contribution from the member states. So when in November the mandate of the agency was renewed, my plea to the member state was make sure that this is not just a mechanical rubber stamp exercise. The renewal of the mandate needs to be accompanied by genuine contribution or at least adequate resources for the agency. Because if that is not the case, we might at one point reach a tipping point, and this tipping point would most likely lead to the suspension of activities which in such a volatile region, which in a region where people are so desperate and are losing hope for a better future, is certainly not the best recipe. We have seen too frequently over the last year number of people, especially in Lebanon or coming from Syria, trying to cross the sea, perfectly knowing that they are taking the risk to drown, but their hope for a better life is such that they are ready to take any type of risk. And we have seen again last week a boat which capsized and people having drawn, among them many Palestinian refugees coming from Syria, but also from the camp in Lebanon. I had three asks when it comes to the financial support to the agency. On one hand, make sure that we can deliver on our mandate, which is our program budget, the $848 million, which is a slight increase compared to last year, which is extremely modest when we take into consideration the inflationary pressure on the region and the high cost of living. I would even say it's a zero natural growth budget that we are presenting. Then obviously we need also the support for our humanitarian response. But last but not least, over the last 10 years, the agency has gone through so many austerity measures, has been unable to reinvest in its asset, that we also need a number of one-off capital investment in order to allow the agency to adapt its infrastructure for an UNRWA delivering its services in a modernized way. I also explained to the member state what does it mean. That means, for example, that we are implementing a digital transformation in the way that we are providing education. We are also using more and more digital tools when it comes to the delivery of our health services. And we do believe that if we do not want to miss a train of digitalization, that's the area where the agency will be able to continue to make some efficiencies. Last but not least, I also called on the agencies to avoid to perpetuate the statu quo in which UNRWA has been locked in over the last 10 years. We need to overcome this discrepancy between what we are expected to deliver, the lifeline we are in the life of the Palestinian refugees, and to make sure that we are not failing on our collective commitment vis-à-vis the refugees until the day there is a proper political solution. Because in the absence of a political solution, there is no real alternative to the services UNRWA is providing in the region. And if we fail to keep our activity running, that can only create a void, and in such an environment, void might also be filled by something no one really around this table would like to see. So I think I will stop here, but basically our strategic framework for the next 5 years is now available, is also an instrument to allow us to know that the commitment of the agency to be a predictable partner which will continue to invest in the human development of this community across the region. And maybe just to end with this note, there is a huge appetite, a huge expectation from the youth I'm meeting there, including in Ain El Tal, when I started by telling you how miserable the situation is. At the same time, I met young people there who basically were sharing with me their dreams, their hope, their enthusiasm into education and vocational training, and basically asking the agency to continue to invest in this area. And here this morning, I could also share with the member states a number of great and success stories that the agency, but our partner, can also be proud of. Like, for example, there was the representative of UNICC, which was present during the briefing this morning, and we were talking about the partnership we have developed, where today more than 100 people in Gaza are providing information technology solution to the broader UN system, and all their job are income-generating projects, meaning by this does not cost any more to the agency. And I believe that providing this kind of future prospect to the youth is also a sign that in a region, despite all its challenges we are confronted with, we can keep this light of hope alive for the people there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner General, for this introduction. I would like now to open the floor to questions, and I'll start with Tamara Boelinin, who is our correspondent of the Kuwait News Agency and president of the Association of Correspondents.
Good morning. Thank you very much. On behalf of ACNU, I would like to welcome you and thank you for giving us this briefing. The question is on the strike, which is started, I think, yesterday, and it seems it will be more than 1 day, and partially as well. Does it mean that the UNRWA inside has an internal structure problem, or there is other reason for this strike? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you're referring to the strike of one of our field office, which is West Bank. It's an unfortunate strike because basically a week ago we have put in place a committee. In fact, the claim or the raison of being of this strike is related to a salary survey which has taken place a few months ago, where rightly so, staff are also suffering from this inflationary pressure and see that the cost of living is increasing and had high expectation about the outcome of the salary survey. Now, whenever we do a salary survey in a given context, we have comparator, and one of the main comparators, since primarily our staff are teachers, nurses, and so on, we have the host authority as the main comparator, but it is also completed with other organizations delivering similar services. We did this survey, and the survey indicated that the big majority of our staff was above comparator, but we had some categories below comparator, and we have also seen that those working in East Jerusalem were below the poverty line. So based on this, we took decision to adjust, in fact, all those who were below the comparator, and also to take into consideration the extreme hardship in East Jerusalem compared to any other workers there. Unfortunately, the union wanted to deliver more, which we can understand, but because they wanted to deliver more to all the staff, they decided to go on strike, and the strike started yesterday. I hope that this strike will come to an end, because ultimately the one impacted by the strike are the communities. So I know that a number of discussions are going on right now. We are open to dialogue. We are open to the reinstatement of a committee which was put in place just to review the methodology of the salary survey.
Thank you very much, Commissioner General. Other questions to Mr. Lazzarini in the room? Nick Cumming-Bruce is our correspondent of the New York Times.
Good morning. Thank you for the briefing. Could you just give us some sense of the reaction you got from your meeting with donors, whether you see any prospect of widening the circle of donors that have been sustaining UNRWA operations for a number of years? And secondly, I also wondered whether the onset of a new government in Israel is in any way hampering UNRWA's ability to deliver its services in Gaza and the West Bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Well, this morning was a briefing, so I did not expect an answer from the member states or from the donor per se, but obviously we have indication about what is to be expected in 2023. And my worry is that 2023 might be, again, a very, very difficult year. 2022, we ended up, I would say, I was reassured that we could close the year maybe on the 23rd of December. So just to give you an idea on how, until the last minute, we didn't know if yes or not we would be able to cover the salaries of 30,000 staff by the end of the year. Now we end up again for the fourth consecutive years with a very severe deficit. I think the environment in which we evolve today, I think you know better than anyone else, it's a hugely fragmented type of environment, but we keep being warned by some donors that in 2023 they might have to revisit their overseas budget. It might go towards a reduction, plus they are competing a situation where they have also to allocate the money. Obviously, we have the crisis in Ukraine, which is impacting also the attention in the region, but this is not the only reason. There are a few elements here. One of them are countries who have decided to decrease their overseas budget. It has severely impacted the organization. For example, we know the UK 2 years ago went from 0.7 to 0.5 of their national growth, and this on UN agencies has been translated by decrease up to between 60 and 70%. An agency like ours, so dependent on cash, it has an immediate impact. Then you heard me also many times talking about the general contribution coming from the Arab country, which has also substantially decreased over the last few years, and I keep engaging with the country of the region to have them back as a proper partner of the agency, and also to make sure that their political support expressed through the renewal of the mandate or other type of a resolution and statement be translated into tangible resources. Then we have, and I mentioned to the member states this morning, I am watching with more and more anxiety elections in donor countries, because depending on the coalition which would emerge after the election, you might have a government less supportive to Palestinians and hence less supportive to an agency like UNRWA. In fact, the reliability the agency enjoyed till, I would say, 2010, 2012, as long as the Israel-Palestinian conflict was still a priority on the international agenda, this reliability and predictability has gone. And we saw it in 2018 with the decision to defund the organization by the former Trump Republican administration. And I would say we are more and more exposed nowadays to this kind of domestic political consideration. On your second question, so to sum up, I'm very concerned about this, no doubt. And, but unfortunately, I cannot tell you yet who will be able to step into the void left by a country deciding to decrease nowadays. On the second question, there is absolutely no indication for the time being. We have the normal access when it comes to the delivery of our services, both in Gaza and the West Bank. But we are very concerned. I'm very concerned about the increased violences impacting this community. And obviously, when violences are going on, it disturbs the movement and our ability to properly deliver. But this is mainly because of the overall situation rather than someone preventing us to have access.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there is other questions in the room. Otherwise, let's go to the platform. And we have a question from Jamie Keaton, who was our correspondent of Associated Press. Jamie.
Thank you, Alessandra, and thank you, Mr. Lazzarini, for the briefing. My question is twofold. It wants to build on what Nick's question was. With the new government in Israel, how concerned are you that the demands of the refugee population may increase, and in particular, in light of the possibility that there may be more settlement activity and colonization within the West Bank? That's my first question. My second question is, how much, there have been some calls from at least one NGO, maybe more, expressing concerns about anti-Semitic comments by teachers and various other staffers within UNRWA. What have you been doing to root that out? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, on the first question, I'm generally concerned across the region. I'm concerned about the level of dependency Palestinian refugees have vis-à-vis the agency in places like Lebanon and like Syria. Today in Syria, the entire remaining Palestinian refugee population is receiving cash assistance and food assistance by the organization. We have seen increased poverty in the Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, which reaches more than 90%. There have been a stiff increase compared to previous assessment, which means, again, we are the only lifeline for this community, and basically their expectation vis-à-vis their lifeline are also increasing. And the same happened in Gaza. In Gaza, we have more than 1 million people who are also dependent on our food assistance. So yes, I'm concerned that increased tension, increased volatility, increased uncertainty, and increased violences will also have an impact on increased expectation vis-à-vis the agency at a time the agency is struggling to keep even afloat its own activities. And I expect this pressure on the agency to continue in the foreseeable future. On your second question, this is an issue which is regularly raised with me by a number of lawmakers, because most of the time these allegations are first brought to lawmakers who after that ask their own government, how come you are supporting UNRWA, or what are you doing to make sure that this does not happen? Let me start by saying that I'm very proud about the education being provided in our school. We are using, as you know, the curriculum of the host country, but we are also the only one in the region which, number one, has reached gender parity a long time ago, which, number two, since the beginning of the 90s, have deployed and rolled out a proper human rights curriculum in all our schools, and we have also put in place a school parliamentary to promote critical thinking of the student in our region. Now, whenever we are confronted, and I also keep telling member states and donors that in this region where we are dealing with the longest lasting unresolved conflict with very deep emotion, we are not trying to reconcile the Israel narrative with the Palestinian narrative. These are narratives which belong, to each community. But when it comes to the UNRWA school as a UN agency, we will not tolerate anything which is which would teach or promote any value against UN principle or UNESCO standard. And whenever we would be confronted with a situation of this nature, this will be tackled. Now, internally, we have taken quite a number of measures, including during COVID today through the digital learning platform, where basically, as an agency, we provide all the necessary guidance on how to teach the material being made available in our school and to make sure that everything is put into its right context. The line not to be crossed, clearly, and there is absolutely there is a total zero tolerance, is whenever it comes to promoting discrimination, promoting racism, anti-Semitism, or promoting glorification of violence. I keep repeating also, colleagues, we are not operating in a zero-risk environment, but within this no zero-risk environment, as an agency, through our internal oversight mechanism, we are applying and implementing a zero-tolerance policy.
Thank you very much. I go back to the room. Agnès Pedrero, AFP, French language.
Yes, alors, du coup, je vais poser la question en français, alors, si ça vous convient. Je voulais savoir sur les 1,6, parce que l'an passé, vous aviez également demandé 1,6 milliard de dollars. Pourquoi avoir demandé le même montant? Et sur les fonds demandés l'an passé, combien en avez-vous reçu?
Merci. Shall I answer in French or in English?
Vous pouvez répondre en français si vous voulez. C'est comme vous voulez.
OK. Nous avons légèrement augmenté le budget qu'on appelle le core budget des programmes, qui en fait est la colonne vertébrale de l'agence et qui couvre toutes les activités dites de service public pour les communautés palestiniennes. Et ce budget-là a augmenté de 4%. Il est à 848 millions cette année. Donc la différence se trouve certainement dans les budgets d'appel humanitaire, où il y a peut-être eu une ou deux réductions, et on arrive plus ou moins au même total. Les budgets humanitaires sont basés sur des évaluations de besoins. C'est vraiment need-based. Par contre, le programme budget, c'est basé sur le mandat qui nous est donné et sur les services publics à délivrer à la population palestinienne. L'année dernière, on a levé environ 1,2 milliard, je crois que c'est 1,175 milliard de dollars. Et le budget programme a été couvert à 90% et un peu plus. Maintenant, sur cette question-là, pendant 3 ans avant cette année, on a eu un budget zero growth qui est resté au même niveau. Et évidemment, ça ne couvrait pas tous les besoins. Et ça a forcé l'agence à mettre en place des mesures d'austérité. Et l'austérité arrive à un coût très élevé, parce qu'aujourd'hui, par exemple, on a régulièrement jusqu'à 50 enfants pour un enseignant par classe. On a ce qu'on appelle le double shifting. On a un enseignant sur 6 qui est un journalier. Donc évidemment, qui ne peut pas être, comment dire, entraîné, ou on ne peut pas avoir les mêmes attentes qu'un enseignant qui travaille de manière indéterminée avec l'agence. Si on regarde au niveau des consultations médicales aujourd'hui, en moyenne, on a donné 7 millions de consultations médicales en 2022. En moyenne, un docteur ne passe pas plus de 3 minutes avec un patient. Donc évidemment, c'est un peu rapide là aussi. Donc dans chacun des domaines, et on n'a pas réussi, à cause de ces mesures d'austérité, à rattraper par exemple les retards que l'on a enregistrés en matière d'enseignement au moment du Covid. Parce que partout, y inclus dans notre région, il y a eu un impact en fait de ce distance learning en matière d'éducation. Il n'y a pas eu le même suivi individuel pour chacun des enfants. Et puis aussi, nous n'avons pas été en mesure de réinvestir évidemment dans notre infrastructure qui devient de plus en plus obsolète, et raison aussi pour laquelle ce matin, j'ai indiqué aux États membres qu'il nous faut, en plus du programme budget et en plus de l'appel d'urgence, quelques investissements one-off pour nous permettre de remettre à jour notre infrastructure, surtout si l'on veut réussir, par exemple, dans le domaine de la transformation digitale, qui est au cœur, je dirais, des transformations que l'on souhaiterait mettre en œuvre dans les années à venir.
Merci beaucoup, Commissioner General. We have another question on the line from Lisa Schlein, who is our correspondent of Voice of America. Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning to you. I have a couple of questions. The first is, how many people does UNRWA actually support throughout the region with what your donations are? And then you mentioned that the Arab countries were giving a lot less money. Why is that? Why is the support from these countries decreasing? And by how much? And also regarding the United States government, is the Biden administration being a bit more generous to you than apparently the Trump administration was? I'm not clear on that. Did the Trump administration actually cut you off? Did they give you any money at all? Is the Biden administration responding to your appeal, or are you still in a kind of never land? Thank you.
Thank you. On the first question, in fact, thank you for asking, because there is always a belief that we are providing full-fledged assistance to 5.9 million Palestinian refugees. But that's not the case. We have recorded 5.9 million Palestinian refugees. But when it comes to the services For example, when we talk about education, we have 550,000 girls and boys in our school. We have 705 schools across the region. We have 8,000 people in our vocational training center. We provide primary health care to about 2 million people in the region. We are providing social safety net to about 400,000 people among the most vulnerable, and we are providing cash assistance and food assistance to about 2 million people in the region. And that's basically the scope of the services, and this is being delivered with nearly 30,000 staff, primarily coming from the community. By the way, I stress also this point because it's thanks to the fact that the staff comes to the community that we are able, in fact, in time of conflict, but we saw it also during the pandemic, to keep most of our services because of this proximity and well, I mean, primarily because of this proximity, because they are with the community. And this is also quite different from many other partners who are implementing programs through, I would say, third party. Why has there been a decrease? I don't have the response, but I have observed a few trends in the region. The first one, indeed, the Arab contribution in 2018 represented about 25% of the overall contribution to the agency. In 2021, it was less than 3%, and last year it was 4%, and thanks to contribution from Kuwait, Qatar, and a late contribution also from Saudi Arabia. We have seen that some decreases have also been related to new regional political dynamic. It is true that after some agreement, member states have decreased also their engagement with the agency, despite the fact that they continue to support through statement and resolution the plight of the Palestinian refugees, but it has not always been, it has not anymore necessarily been translated into contribution to UNRWA. Having said that, I'm very engaged with the member state of the region, and I really hope that they will come back as a strategic partner as they used to be in the past, because historically the agency has always enjoyed strong support, if not necessarily for the program budget, but at least for the building of schools, building, construction, maintenance of schools or health center. So I really hope that this will be addressed. On the Biden administration, they resume fully the contribution to the agency. They came back as a partner they used to be, are the main, I would say, donors to the agency. And to answer your question, yes, in 2018, there was a decision from the previous Trump administration to phase out and to stop contribution to the agency. And basically in 2019, and there was no contribution anymore from the United States, and the Biden administration has taken decision to resume in full the contribution we used to enjoy before the defunding decision.
Commissioner General, Jamie from AP had asked about also the lower donations, especially from Gulf states, and you have answered to that. So now he's asking me if you could say whether the countries of the Abraham Accords are also donating less, and if so, why? And then we have a follow-up from Lisa.
Listen, in my engagement, I keep saying that there should be absolutely no contradiction by being part of the Abraham Accord, having a rapprochement, and to continue to support the agency and the Palestinian refugees. Member states, all the countries, part of it, have supported the renewal of the mandate, and so basically, we would expect, as a member of the United Nations and as a member state, to help an agency on the mandate to fulfill its mandate. And I also keep saying that there is, if you watch to the other countries in Europe or in the US, they are supportive of the agency, and they are also they have their own political stand in the region. So there should be absolutely no contradiction. But in reality, this question should be asked to the countries themselves, because here I'm just observing of what we see from where we are and what the impact has been. But in one of my statements when I went to the Arab League at the ministerial meeting was to tell the country in the region, please make sure that UNRWA does not become a byproduct or a proxy of political consideration, which has nothing to do with UNRWA. We have a mandate from all the member states. They are also the member state who renews this mandate. Make sure that this renewal is not just a rubber stamp, and make sure that resources are being made available to ensure that we remain this predictable partner.
Thank you very much. Lisa, you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. First, how much money is the United States actually contributing to UNRWA? And then secondly, you seem to indicate that the Arab states are very supportive of the Palestinian people when it comes to resolutions and stuff like that. But when it comes to giving money, they're not so good at that. So they seem to be saying one thing and doing something else. Doesn't that smack a bit of hypocrisy? And does that did that really begin with the Abraham Accords, or has it been something that has been there for some time? Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, the US contribution, I think, in 2022 has been in total of $340 million US dollar, making the US the main donor to the agency. This is followed after that by Germany, and after that the EU, and in general all the European countries together represent also more or less 60% of our contribution within the agency. So the US, since the resumption of the assistance, is the main donor of the agency. Listen, I keep asking and reminding member states that we have to walk the talk. We cannot just ask an agency which depend only and exclusively, well, not exclusively, but essentially of voluntary contribution, that if we renew the mandate and say what we expect the agency has to deliver, that the resources be also provided. Now, in the past, the Arab countries have always been supportive, both politically and in terms of financial resources, but primarily the financial resources went more for building schools, building a health center, and not necessarily on the program budget per se. We have seen increases on the program budget, mainly at the time the agency financially struggled at the time of the US defunding, but it was very much a one-off of many of them when it came to substantial contribution. But I also do believe today that in terms of financial contribution, they can do much more. My call to them is make sure that the Palestinian refugees feel that when you express solidarity, that there is a real solidarity also expressed through resources being made available for an agency like UNRWA to ensure the future of their children through our education system. So this issue is obviously, I'm constantly looking at ways to make sure that there is less discrepancy between what's being stated and what's really being done, because this discrepancy is putting unbearable pressure on the agency. And I keep saying that, we might be an agency delivering service like public-like services, but we do not have the financial tool or fiscal tools of a public service provider. Again, we rely only and exclusively on voluntary contribution.
Thank you very much, Commissioner General. I don't see other questions for you. We've taken a lot of your time. So if this is the case, I would like to thank all the correspondents who have participated in this press conference, and above all you and your team for having come to Geneva to present this important appeal. Thank you very much to everybody. Bon appétit for those who are not haven't had the lunch, and good luck for your very important work. Thank you. Merci.